I'm not that old. When I started in the industry, there was no HTML5. In fact, there was no PowerPoint, there was no Excel, there was no email, there was no digital screens. You think, how on earth did we actually do anything? And so a lot has changed over the time I've enjoyed in the industry, but what's happening now is absolutely the biggest change that this industry, I believe, has ever seen. And the sort of stuff that Francois was just talking about is going to continue to change us over the next few years. But it brings some real challenges with it for us as a business. And I just wanted to explore those over the next few minutes of how we meet that challenge of changing technology in our current worlds. I think he said sometimes it sounds like it's easy, but it's not, and that's absolutely true. So just a bit of background on who I'm representing, which is a company called Primesight. For those of you who don't know, Primesight operates in the UK, and we operate about 40,000, just under 40,000 advertising sites, of which something like 1,000 are digital. So a relatively small proportion of the estate, but obviously a really important proportion of that estate. And those digital sites go across our roadside environment, our cinema environment, and our airports across the country. And most recently, we have a product called InLink, which is a sort of smart phone box, replacing a lot of old BT phone boxes. Runs across all those as well. And in every one of those places, we use Broadsign as Broadsign control on the units in order to display our ads. So it just sort of gives you a bit of context as to where we are. So the challenge is, how do we operate our business in this new world? The challenge of connecting old world, new world, bringing it together. You know, we might think it's easy. We've got this word API. Everyone says, that's it. We get an API and we plug it in. Job done. And I think that actually the industry perhaps hasn't done itself as much of a credit as it might have done, because, I mean, I guess we are in advertising and we tend to promote ourselves pretty quickly. And I think there has been quite a lot of times when perhaps we're sending signals to the outside world that whether it's automation or whether it's programmatic, or I think my favorite was artificial intelligence actually now driving out-of-home buying decisions. I'm not saying none of those have happened. They've all happened in bits. But what they are not yet is really scalable. And that's the challenge. How do we make that scalable for our industry going forwards? The promise is there. The things we tell the world sometimes are there. The reality of making that happen in our business is tough. So sometimes we signal success a little too early. But there are some significant barriers to progress that we have to overcome. Some of those we are well down the road on. And, you know, that last presentation Francois was giving, you could see how they've got a really strong roadmap of things that they're looking to do to continue to improve and overcome some of the barriers going forwards. And so some of it is in technology, but some of those barriers are also in other places. And I'm just going to focus on 3 areas, really, that I think some of that challenge and barrier to progress exists in how we manage our product, in how we manage our process, and then interestingly, just reflecting on the last part of that previous item, how that reflects in price as well. So just to put in context the product, I mean, this is really about a legacy problem. And the legacy problem is that when we started with digital units, they were to a certain extent dealt with as if they were ultravisions or scrollers. You know, the scrollers came in and they replaced a static classic billboard, and we thought, great, we can sell that to 3 people at the same time. Marvelous. 3 times as much revenue. Terrific. Turns around 3 ads, sometimes 4, depending on how you built it. And we got digital in, and we said, great, well, we can do some more of that. And it's sort of, the industry sort of settled on 6. So you say, okay, I'll have 6 ads, and they can scroll around, and I can sell the same billboard now to 6 people, and they can send me a piece of artwork, and I don't even have to send anyone to paste it up anymore. Marvelous. And that was okay. And then people said, well, actually, it's now digital. I'm surely I can do something more interesting with that. I can change it a bit more. And what if I don't want to be 1 in 6? Well, that's okay. So you can dominate. So we'll give you a slot, and you can just dominate that screen. And the problem then is, well, what do you do with the 6 guys who were expecting to turn up at any time of the night or day and to see their ad rotating as 1 in 6 around that particular screen? They hadn't accepted that it could be sold to one person. What do you do if you want to do something a little bit more triggered to an event? How do you put that slot in and move someone off? And if you want to do something a little bit more time-based, how do you make that happen? And the legacy problem is driven because most of our digital screens are bought alongside campaigns that are also running on classic inventory. So they're running on 2-week campaigns, broadly. And those 2-week campaigns, booked on classic, booked on digital, and they expect to see their ads up on the digital at the same time. And that doesn't fit very well with this requirement to be flexible and allow new advertisers or advertisers to think of using digital in a more flexible way. And so you have to create some rules around that work for both sides. Rules that balance the guarantee and the flexibility to allow both parties to access and make good use of it. And different people have looked at different ways of doing it. This is just the approach that we've taken. The first thing we said is actually 1 in 6 doesn't really make sense. You should allow a client to have any percentage share of time. So I want to be on the screen 100% of the time, or I want to be on the screen 1% of the time. If you think of the old 1 in 6, it was about 16.6% was sort of what they were getting. Let's allow them to choose. And let's allow them to choose that on a variable basis. So you might say on Monday to Tuesday, I'll be at 5% of the time, and if I wanted to be later in the week, I could be up to 50% of the time when it was most important to me. That's fine, so we can do that. But then we're saying, okay, well, when are we going to provide that share of time? Because in the 1 in 6 model, we provide that share of time every hour, because you expect to be able to turn up and see your ad 1 in 6 at any hour of the day. So every hour is equally as important, or is equally expected to have that advertising being shown. And actually, if you want to introduce flexibility to allow those people to come in and make the opportunity to be driven by data or any other factors, you need to be able to provide some flexibility for that. So we said, actually, what we'll do is we'll allow clients to lock the amount of time that they were going to have a particular share of time being shown. I want my 30%, and I want it every hour of every day. That's sort of where we were before, and that's at the premium end of locking the inventory and making it guaranteed for that particular advertiser. Or I'll tell you what, actually I'm not so interested in being in every hour, but I do want to be in certain day parts. As long as I'm in that day part somewhere with my share of time, 5% share of time, I'm happy. But I want to be in that day part, I don't want to be moved off somewhere else. Or I just want share of time by day. I really don't mind when in the day, as long as I get my share of time in the day. Or it may be a week. variance of duration on that. The point is that the advertiser then, every advertiser, is agreeing both the share of time that they are going to have and the qualification of when that share of time is going to run. And what we as a media owner are doing is not necessarily just giving away locked by hour as a default to every campaign, which is where we were with 1 in 6, and making it harder to create that flexibility. So that was a sort of a really quite important part of helping to bring together these two worlds of how do I make my digital more flexible, how do I provide the guarantee that advertisers are expecting across the rest of their inventory. And the outcome of this, a few examples of what that might look like. Share of time, 15%, locked by week. I'm going to get, in this instance, 1,512 minutes of advertising on a screen in every week, and it might appear anywhere. Or I might lock it by a day, so it will differ. The ad will play at different points during the day, but each day will have 216 minutes of display. Or I might lock it by hour, 9 minutes of every hour within the day. So they're just ensuring that clients understand what they're going to get from it. So creating that process and that product, if you like, was an important part of helping us to determine the way in which we wanted to sell our out-of-home. But then the other bit we touched on was the pricing, and pricing in out-of-home is tricky. It's tricky because we have the process that we go through that is a serving of availability, an offer to clients, a series of optioning, because one media owner is never likely to be the only contributor to a client's campaign, and therefore the purchasers, the buyers, are trying to align a number of media owners' inventory into the same campaign. Creating an option allows them to get that together before they make a uniformed buy into the market. And throughout all of that process, there is an ongoing discussion and negotiation which is taking place between the buyer and the seller. And that negotiation is based on a whole range of variables. How long the ads are being booked for, how many of them are going to be booked, what the locked levels are in our instance, what type of environments they're in, what type of lead times, formats. And right at the end there, you've got what type of audience it is. It's sort of often been the least and the last bit that they're actually talking about, because we still are working to a large extent on frames and format sizes as being the definer of price. And yet that doesn't really fit with the new world. So that's a really tricky area to get around. If you've got all of that variability and you want to get to a more connected, automated method of purchasing, how do you deal with that? Do you build in the complexity in order to reflect the way that the work is currently being bought and sold? Or do you reduce the flexibility and the complexity because actually we should think about it in a different way for the challenges that are going forwards? And if you do that, just a couple of sort of thoughts around that really. We could say, I tell you what, forget all that old stuff, let's just do it all on audience. Surely that's the new way. We'll do it on cost per thousand, because there's a commonality, everyone understands cost per thousand, that's fine. Why shouldn't we do that? Because actually we haven't really got a very consistent measurement for cost per thousand. In the UK, we've got something called Root. Root is great. We all invest in Root. It's invested in both by the buyer side and the sell side. But it doesn't produce a consistent cost per thousand at frame level that accurately reflects the value of one frame versus another. It's just too much. You think of all those frames on all those different types of roads with all those different types of traffic going down them. It's really difficult to get that reflected accurately in cost per thousand. Not impossible, but it's really tricky. What about location? Really important, because points of interest and ensuring you've got geographic coverage across the country are absolutely key to establishing the value of a particular format or type of format. But how do you price against that? Infinitely variable. What do? I price, the cost of something that's right outside the newsagents because the particular product wants it, or outside the garage, or the cost of something in London versus something in Bristol. Really tricky. And what do? Maybe we just stick with frame size. That's established. People have got it. We know roughly the value of a large 48 sheet, but it's not audience related. So that's a question for us, really. How complex do we need it to be? And if we take that example of going into audience as being the area that we sort of think it's traveling for obvious reasons, you take a frame ID, you take a period of time, a share of time for the plays, and you can appropriate the audience by hour. But you've still got to then work out, if you're doing individual slots or bits of slots, how you apportion the audience to that. And that's not easy. Root allows some of that data, but it doesn't get it down to a granular enough level to allow you to add those impacts back up effectively for a particular buy very easily. And then what do you use for your context for comparison? You're using cost per thousand, but you compare it against different environments, different formats, different regions of the country. Again, tricky areas. And then we've got the process by which we bring it to market. And in our business, we use something called Fusion as our sort of asset management database. And if you think about the 30-odd thousand, nearly 40,000 panels we've got, what it's doing for that is it's running things like rents and rates and electricity and bill posting and getting the photos back from bill posters in the middle of the night. I looked at the file the other day, we've got about 4 million photos that bill posters have sent us to say that they've posted stuff over the years. Don't know why we've got 4 million, don't know why we kept them all, but we've got them. And that underlies our asset control, if you like, the physical assets on the streets. But the requirement is then to sell those and bring together the sell in both classic and digital inventory and surface it to those people who want to purchase it. So before I touch on that bit for a little bit, a couple of points just over on the right-hand side, you've got something called space. And space is something that's came out of the UK Industry Standards Committee. And the Industry Standards Committee is a committee that is set up between IPAO, that is the specialists, the advertising agencies specialists, and Outsmart, which is the UK outdoor home media owner trade body. And the objective of the Industry Standards Committee is to have a forum where both the buy and the sell side can have a discussion about those matters that are implementationally important, and where, if possible, an agreed standard helps both parties to know what to develop towards and how to manage data. And over the time that we've been running that committee, space is one of the things that's come out of it over the last couple of years. And we now in the UK have about 450,000 unique structures in a single database, which is called Space. And that database holds all of the individual frames, classifies them by environment, and brings in third-party boundary sets like schools, so that we've got one place that we can go to and refer to whether or not a panel is within a certain distance of a school boundary, and therefore should or shouldn't take certain data. And of course, APIs can connect to that, allowing anyone who's building systems to be able to pull that data and know that they're pulling it from a consistent base. Then there are some extensions on that. Clients and brands. why do we all give them different names? How many times, Coca-Cola must be in about 4 different variants just in my business, let alone in everybody else's businesses. So a single place where we code clients and brands, we give them single numbers, helping towards a more automated, a more seamless transaction base. Root, the audience measurement system, we now use Space to pass frames up for classification. And it can be accessed either through a web or an API, or there are some legacy schemas that allow people to get data into that. So for us, that was quite an interesting area going forward to look at those sorts of things. And the industry standards then went on and said, okay, well, there's some terminology, and I've already heard things like impressions used today. Actually, we had a long discussion about it, and in the UK, we call them impacts. And we call them impacts because they are fundamentally different from the impressions that are delivered as a result of other, particularly online type of media. The calculation of an impact is different. So we call it share of time, we call it share of impacts or number of impacts, and then we've got a number of other areas. So just trying to help ensure that there is some consistency over the way that we are surfacing our language when we're looking at these things. And then we looked at areas like playout reporting. Clients want more playout reporting, and there were various people providing that in slightly different ways. And what we said was actually it would be much easier if we can standardize and all agree what actually a playout report should consist of, and then we can all build our systems so that they're fundamentally able to provide the same type of playout data. So we described that, and then we described the different levels that people might get to. So people might say, yeah, I'm giving playout data, but actually what they're doing is they're just writing it down on a piece of paper and handing it over. Well, you could call that, sort of level 1. Or somebody else may have done a load of work on it and be providing almost instantaneous access to playout data in real time. Fine, well, we should be able to say that that's great and you're at level 6. So we're just helping to differentiate and show a journey that people are on. One of the areas that's just coming up actually for the Standards Committee was being mentioned earlier is we're looking at the Open Direct standard, because the Open Direct standard for the IAB is a good starting point, but there are lots of bits of that that don't really fit the out-of-home medium. And what we decided was actually there is a danger that everyone will go off and do the bits that don't quite fit in different ways, and then we won't have a standard approach at all. So there's a lot of work going on to try and make sure that there is consistency in the approach to Open Direct standard. So we used that data to consolidate the industry. In our business, we then have Pilot, which surfaces our availability to the various bits of the market that we want to trade with. Some of those will be out-of-home specialists, and for us that accounts for something like 70-80% of our revenue, and they will have their own software and ideas about how they want to connect and how they want to trade with us, and we have the ability to connect with them in that way. But there are also products that we have that allow us to surface our inventory to people who are purchasing online. And indeed, we've been working with Broadsign through the Reach product to enlarge the scope of the people that we can reach out to for our particular marketplace. And when we think about that, reaching out, one of the things that we're concerned about is that I think there's been a feeling that if you put your product out onto a DSP, that there is a sort of feeling that you're putting out remnant inventory, or you're going to end up in a cost per thousand sort of race to the bottom. And because nobody really understands cost per thousand in out-of-home anyway, that's just going to be a disaster. That's not our view. Our view is that actually what we're doing is surfacing a small amount of our inventory in a way which can be accessed immediately to those clients who want to come through that particular platform. So we're giving them access to premium inventory because I can get it now across our portfolio, and they have the flexibility to either buy or not and serve that ad pretty much in real time. The transaction basis for that is cost per thousand adults. It's not perfect, but it sort of works, and I think we're going to, have to do more work on that in the future. It's great to hear that there's work being done to support that. And it's also absolutely at a price premium because we're only putting in a limited supply. That access to that platform, that access to that inventory is limited and at a premium price. One example of how we've used that quite recently is a campaign that we ran. We served a percentage of time because if you go back to that chart I showed where we can choose a percentage of time, we take out 5-7% share of time, put it onto the platform, share it with the cost per thousand, and out it went to reach. And on the purchasing side, Infectious Media, a media agency who had built their own DSP, working with John Lewis, and had determined a number of areas where their intelligence and their link to their client helped them to understand that they were appropriate geographical locations to want to reach a particular audience. So they said, okay, these are the sites that we're after, and when we think it's the right moment, we'll buy that ad and we'll put it on the screen. And that inventory was available because it was in that sort of percentage share of time that we'd made available on the platform. So they went out, they bought that, and those campaigns surfaced. It's work in progress. It's what I said, it's not easy, and we're absolutely not there 100%, and I think there is more work that can be done because that link between how much we surface and how much we're controlling the rest of our inventory needs still some work in it. But it is bringing those two worlds closer together and allowing us to control that process. The end result of that was that they made their selections when they needed to. That was their ad. We could see their ad. We had copy approval on that ad before it went out, which is obviously important for us because we're not actually controlling the platform. They're doing that directly. And we need to make sure that we're happy that the content being served is appropriate, which in that case obviously it was. And there's a chart we've already seen. We were able to check and see what was going on as it happened. And finally, the ads were served. And a really interesting piece of learning for a number of parties in that process. And I think we'll see more of that. And look forward to that tremendously. But it is still part of bringing those two worlds together. So I guess that's really what I wanted to talk about, really, is just hopefully give you a bit of a view of the challenge that we've got. But it's an exciting challenge. It's a great opportunity. And I expect we'll continue to be learning over the next few years.